Illiterate girls shouldn't be allowed near tables like this. The words landed lightly, almost casually, but the silence that followed was heavy enough to stop the clinking of silverware midair. The restaurant glowed with warm amber lighting, polished glass reflecting quiet wealth in every corner. But Lily Monroe stood there in the middle of it all, her worn black apron tied neatly at her waist, her fingers still curled around a leather-bound menu she hadn't yet handed over. For a split second, she thought she had misheard. People said things all the time in places like this, sharp things, careless things, but something about the way Charlotte Reed smiled, slow and deliberate, made it clear this one was meant to cut. A few guests at nearby tables shifted in their seats, eyes flickering between them, curiosity rising like a silent tide. Lily felt it, that familiar heat creeping up her neck, the instinct to shrink, to apologize, to disappear before the moment could stretch any further. But she didn't move. Instead, she blinked once, steady, as if grounding herself in the weight of the room. "I can read it just fine, ma'am," she said, her voice calm, almost too calm, like glass that hadn't cracked yet. Charlotte's lips curled slightly, unimpressed. "Oh, then maybe you can explain why the specials are still wrong on this board," she added, tapping one manicured finger against the menu, though she didn't bother to look down at it. Lily followed the gesture with her eyes, already knowing the answer before she checked. The board wasn't wrong. It hadn't been wrong all night. But she understood now, this wasn't about accuracy. This was about control, about reminding someone exactly where they stood. Lily inhaled slowly, the scent of seared steak and expensive wine filling her lungs, grounding her in something real. Around her, the room resumed its quiet rhythm, but softer now, like everyone was listening without wanting to be seen listening. She nodded once. "The board's correct," she replied gently, placing the menu down with care, her movements precise, unhurried. "But if you'd like, I can walk you through the options." Charlotte let out a soft laugh, not loud, but sharp. "Enough to carry." "I'm sure you can," she said, leaning back in her chair as if settling into a performance she had rehearsed many times before. Lily felt her pulse steady, not racing like it used to. Not anymore. Somewhere beneath the fabric of her apron, tucked safely in her pocket, the edge of a worn paperback brushed against her hand. A habit she never broke, a quiet reminder of something she refused to let go of. She didn't reach for it, didn't need to. Just knowing it was there was enough. "The chef's recommendation tonight is the rosemary fillet," she continued, her tone smooth, unshaken. 8 ounces, aged 30 days, served with a red wine reduction. Her words flowed effortlessly, not memorized, but understood, like something she had lived with long before this room ever judged her. For a brief moment, something flickered across Charlotte's face, something small, almost invisible, but it vanished just as quickly as it came. At the far end of the room, a man sat alone, half-shadowed by the soft glow of a pendant light, his attention no longer on his untouched glass of water, but fixed entirely on Lily. He hadn't spoken, not yet, but he had heard every word. The moment passed, but it did not disappear. It lingered in the air long after Lily stepped away from the table, long after she refilled glasses and carried plates to other guests who barely looked at her. Her hands moved with practiced precision, balancing trays, pouring water, nodding politely. But her mind replayed the words over and over, not because they were new, but because they were familiar. Too familiar. She had heard versions of them in quieter tones, dressed in softer language, but always carrying the same meaning. "You do not belong here. You are less." She exhaled slowly as she reached the service station, setting down an empty tray and pressing her palms lightly against the cool marble counter. For a second, just 1 second, she closed her eyes. Not to escape, but to steady herself. The restaurant manager passed behind her, offering a quick glance, the kind that said everything without a word. "Keep moving. Do not make it a scene." Lily gave a small nod, already turning back toward the dining room before the moment could grow into something bigger than she could afford. She needed this job. That was the truth that anchored everything. 2 shifts a day, 6 days a week, just enough to keep the rent paid and the lights on in a studio apartment that barely fit a twin bed and a folding table. It was not much, but it was hers. And for now, that had to be enough. As she moved between tables, She felt the weight in her apron pocket again, the worn paperback brushing against her fingertips like a quiet reminder. She slipped her hand inside for a brief second, not pulling it out, just tracing the edge of the cover, the crease where it had been opened too many times to count. There were notes written in the margins, lines underlined, thoughts scribbled in the spaces where there was room. It was not just a book. It was proof. Proof that she had once been something else. That she could still be. Across the room, the man in the corner had not looked away. Alexander Reed sat with an unreadable expression, his posture relaxed but his gaze sharp, taking in every detail as if he were reading a story no one else noticed. He had watched the exchange from beginning to end, not missing the shift in Lily's voice, the way she chose her words carefully, not out of fear, but out of control. Most people would have snapped back or folded under the pressure. She had done neither. That was what caught his attention. Not the insult, not the tension, but the restraint. It was rare, more rare than anything on the menu that night. He reached for his glass, but did not drink, his focus still anchored to her as she returned to Charlotte's table once more, this time carrying their entrees. Lily placed each dish with quiet confidence, her movements smooth, unhurried, as if nothing had happened at all. "Careful," Charlotte said suddenly, her tone light but edged. "I would hate for you to drop something you cannot afford." A few soft chuckles rose from the table, not loud, but enough. Lily met her gaze for the briefest moment, something steady and unshaken in her eyes. "I will not," she replied simply. No apology, no hesitation, just certainty. And for the first time that evening, Charlotte's smile faltered, not completely, but enough to notice if someone was paying attention. And someone was. The rest of the evening unfolded with a strange kind of tension, the kind that did not explode but quietly stretched itself across every glance and every word left unsaid. Lily moved through her section with the same steady rhythm, but something had shifted inside her, not fragile, not shaken, but sharpened, like a line drawn more clearly than before. She no longer avoided Charlotte's table when she passed it, and she no longer rushed through their service. Instead, she treated them like every other guest, no more, no less. And somehow that balance unsettled Charlotte more than any argument ever could. When the dessert menus were placed down, Charlotte glanced at it briefly before speaking again, her voice softer this time, but still carrying the same edge. "Tell me," she said, tilting her head slightly. "Do you actually understand what you are serving, or do you just memorize words and hope for the best?" The question hung there, light but deliberate, and a few people at the table leaned back just enough to watch without being obvious. Lily did not answer immediately. She let the silence settle, not out of hesitation, but out of choice. Then she reached forward, gently adjusting the angle of the menu so it faced Charlotte more clearly. "The dessert you are looking at," she said calmly, "is a vanilla bean soufflé, baked fresh every hour, served with a reduction that balances sweetness with a slight citrus finish. It is delicate, so timing matters. If you wait too long, it collapses." Her voice did not rise, did not challenge, but it carried a quiet confidence that was impossible to ignore. "Much like assumptions," she added, almost as an afterthought, her eyes steady for just a second before she stepped back. The table went still. Not dramatically, not loudly, but enough that the shift could be felt. Someone at the far end cleared their throat, another reached for their glass, but no one laughed this time. Charlotte's expression tightened, the smile she wore no longer quite as effortless as before. It was subtle, but real. Across the room, Alexander leaned back slightly in his chair, his fingers tapping once against the side of his glass, as if marking the moment. That was it. Not the insult, not the earlier exchange, but this. The way she chose her words, the way she did not attack, did not retreat, but redirected everything with precision. He had seen negotiations worth millions handled with less control than that. Lily turned away before the moment could stretch any further, her steps even, her shoulders relaxed, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. But inside, she felt something settle into place, something quiet but solid. It was not victory, not yet, but it was not defeat either. It was something in between, something that felt like standing her ground without needing anyone's permission to do it. As the night began to wind down, chairs shifted, bills were signed, and the soft hum of conversation returned to its usual rhythm, but the energy around Charlotte's table had changed. She spoke less now, her tone more measured, as if recalibrating something she could not quite name. When Lily returned with the check, she placed it down with the same calm precision she had carried all night. Charlotte did not look at her immediately. Instead, she reached for her purse, pulling out a sleek pen, signing the receipt in one smooth motion. Then, almost as an afterthought, she glanced up. "You are very practiced," she said, the words neutral, but not entirely dismissive. Lily met her gaze, not challenging, not yielding. "I try to be," she replied simply. And for a brief moment, just a flicker, Charlotte did not have a response. Across the room, Alexander stood, leaving a few bills neatly on the table, his eyes still on Lily as he moved toward the exit, not rushed, not hesitant, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had just found something he had not been looking for and now could not ignore. Outside, the night air felt cooler than it should have, a soft breeze moving through the quiet street as the last of the dinner crowd filtered out of the restaurant. Lily stepped out a few minutes after her shift ended, her apron folded neatly over her arm, her shoulders slightly tired but her posture still upright, still composed. The glow from the restaurant windows spilled onto the sidewalk behind her, fading as she moved farther away, heels clicking softly against the concrete. She exhaled, long and slow, as if releasing the weight of the evening one breath at a time. It had not broken her. That mattered more than anything. She reached into her bag, pulling out the worn paperback, her fingers instinctively finding the page she had marked earlier that week. She did not read it right away. Instead, she just held it there, the edges soft from years of use, the ink slightly faded but still clear enough to remind her of who she was beyond uniforms and assumptions. "You handled that better than most people would." The voice came from behind her, calm, measured, unfamiliar but not unwelcome. Lily turned, her grip on the book tightening slightly before she relaxed again. It was him, the man from the corner table. Up close, he looked even more unassuming than he had from a distance, dressed simply, nothing about him signaling the kind of attention he had been giving her all night. "I was doing my job," she replied, her tone polite but guarded, the kind of response that did not invite more than necessary. He nodded once, as if he expected that answer. "Most people would have reacted," he said, stepping a little closer but still keeping a respectful distance. "You did not." Lily tilted her head slightly, considering him for a moment before answering. "Reacting does not change how people see you," she said quietly. "It just confirms what they already decided." The words settled between them, not heavy, but honest. He studied her, not in a way that felt intrusive, but in a way that suggested he was trying to understand something deeper than the surface. "And what do you think they decided about you?" he asked. Lily let out a small breath, her gaze drifting briefly to the streetlights before returning to him. "That I am exactly where I belong," she said, her voice steady, not bitter, not defensive, just factual. "And maybe I am. For now." There was no self-pity in it, no attempt to make him feel anything on her behalf. Just acceptance, and something else beneath it. Something that did not quite look like resignation. He noticed that too. "For now," he repeated, as if testing the weight of the words. "That sounds temporary." A faint smile touched the corner of Lily's lips, subtle but real. "Everything is temporary," she replied. "Some people just get more time to prove otherwise." The street grew quieter around them, the distant hum of traffic fading into the background. For a moment, neither of them spoke, but the silence felt different from the one inside the restaurant. This one was not tense. It was open. He glanced at the book in her hand, the worn cover catching his attention. "What are you reading?" he asked. Lily looked down at it, her fingers brushing lightly over the edge before she turned it slightly so he could see. "Something I started a long time ago," she said. "I have not finished it yet." "Why not?" he asked. She met his eyes again, her expression thoughtful. "Life does not always leave room for the things you want to finish," she answered. Then, after a brief pause, she added, "But I kept it. That counts for something." He nodded slowly, as if that made perfect sense. Because to him, it did. "It does," he said. And for the first time since he had approached her, Lily's guard lowered just a fraction, not because she trusted him completely, but because something about the way he listened felt different. Not judging, not assuming, just listening. And without realizing it, that alone had already begun to change something. The night stretched on just a little longer as they stood there, the space between them no longer defined by roles or expectations, but by something quieter, something unspoken. Lily shifted her weight slightly, tucking the book back into her bag with care, as if placing it away too quickly might break whatever fragile balance had formed. "You watch people a lot," she said after a moment, her tone curious but not accusing. "Not like a customer. More like you were trying to figure something out." He gave a faint smile at that, one that did not deny it. "Maybe I am," he admitted. "And did you?" she asked, folding her arms loosely, her guard not fully up, but not gone either. He took a second before answering, his gaze steady but thoughtful. "I think I saw someone who knows exactly who she is, even when everyone else tries to tell her otherwise." The words were simple, but they landed deeper than she expected. Lily let out a soft breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. "That sounds nicer than reality," she said. "Reality is bills, schedules, and making sure you do not lose the little you have." He nodded, not dismissing it. "That is part of it," he said, "but it is not all of it." She studied him again, more carefully this time, as if trying to place something she could not quite name. "You talk like someone who has options," she said. "Like someone who has never had to choose between what you want and what you need." For the first time, there was a slight shift in his expression, not defensive, but aware. "Everyone chooses," he replied. "Some choices just look different from the outside." Lily considered that, not fully agreeing, but not rejecting it either. The street light above them flickered softly, casting a warm glow that softened the edges of the moment. A car passed in the distance, its headlights briefly illuminating the quiet sidewalk before disappearing again. "So what did you choose?" she asked, the question coming out more direct than she intended. He did not answer right away. Instead, he glanced back toward the restaurant, the reflection of its golden light still visible in the glass doors. "Tonight," he said slowly, "I chose to pay attention." She raised an eyebrow slightly, not convinced that was a real answer, but something about the way he said it made her pause. "That does not sound like much of a risk," she replied. "It can be," he said quietly, "if you see something you cannot ignore after." The words lingered between them, heavier now, carrying a meaning that extended beyond the moment itself. Lily felt it, that subtle shift again, like the ground beneath a conversation changing shape without warning. She was about to respond when her phone buzzed softly in her bag. She pulled it out, glancing at the screen, her expression tightening just slightly before she masked it again. "I should go," she said, slipping the phone back. Without explaining. "Early shift tomorrow." He nodded, stepping back just enough to give her space, but not breaking the connection entirely. "Do you always work this hard?" he asked. Lily gave a small shrug, adjusting the strap of her bag over her shoulder. "I do what I have to," she said. Then, after a brief pause, she added, "And sometimes a little more than that." He watched her for a moment longer, as if committing something to memory, before speaking again. "Lily," he said, using her name for the first time, and it made her stop just for a second. "You are not what they think." She turned back slightly, her eyes meeting his, something unreadable passing through them. "I know," she said quietly. "The question is, will anyone else ever bother to find out?" She did not wait for an answer. She simply turned and walked away, her steps steady, her figure fading into the dim light of the street, leaving him standing there with a realization that had already begun to take shape. Because for him, the answer was no longer a question. It was a decision. The next morning came too quickly, the kind of early that felt unfinished, like the night had not fully let go yet. Lily stood behind the counter before sunrise, tying her apron with practiced hands, the soft hum of the coffee machine filling the quiet space of the cafe where she worked her morning shift. This place was smaller, less polished than the restaurant, but it had its own rhythm, its own honesty. No chandeliers, no whispered judgments behind expensive menus. Just regular people, tired eyes, and the steady exchange of coffee for another chance to get through the day. She preferred it this way. It was easier to breathe here, easier to exist without being measured. Still, her mind drifted back to the night before, not to the insult, not even to Charlotte's voice, but to the conversation outside. To him, there was something about the way he listened that stayed with her, something unfamiliar and quietly disarming. She shook it off, focusing instead on the line forming at the counter, on the orders she needed to remember, on the small details that kept her grounded. 2 large coffees, one with almond milk, one Black. A blueberry muffin, warmed. A quick smile. A thank you, next customer. Simple. Manageable. Across town, Alexander Reed stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling window, the city stretching out beneath him in layers of glass and steel, his reflection faint against the morning light. His office was silent, untouched by the noise of the world below, but his thoughts were anything but still. He had meetings scheduled, decisions waiting, numbers that demanded attention, but none of it held his focus the way it usually did. Instead, he saw her, the way she stood her ground without raising her voice, the way she chose restraint over reaction, the way she carried something more than what her position suggested. He had spent years surrounded by people who spoke loudly about their worth, who demanded recognition before earning it. Lily had done the opposite, and somehow, that made her impossible to overlook. He reached for his phone, pausing for just a second before making a call. Find out where she works during the day, he said simply when the line connected, his tone calm, not rushed, but firm enough to leave no room for delay. Her name is Lily Monroe. There was a brief silence on the other end, then a quiet confirmation. He ended the call without another word, his gaze returning to the city as if the answer was already unfolding somewhere below. Back at the cafe, Lily wiped down the counter between orders, her movements steady, unaware of the shift already in motion. The bell above the door chimed softly as someone stepped inside, but she did not look up right away. Be right with you, she called, finishing the last swipe before turning. And then she paused, not because she did not recognize him, but because she did. He stood there in the same simple way as the night before. No suit, no sign of anything extraordinary, just that same quiet presence that seemed to observe more than it revealed. You found the place, she said, a hint of surprise slipping into her voice before she softened it. He gave a small nod, stepping closer to the counter. I said I would not ignore what I saw, he replied, as if that explained everything. Lily studied him for a moment, something cautious returning to her expression, but not fully closing her off. Most people forget by morning, she said. Most people do, he agreed. I am not most people. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that lingered longer than expected. Lily reached for a cup, her hands moving automatically as she spoke. So what can I get you? She asked, keeping her tone neutral, professional. He glanced briefly at the menu behind her, then back at her. Coffee, he said. Black. She nodded, turning to prepare it, the familiar routine grounding her again. But this time, something was different. Not in the cafe, not in the orders, but in the quiet understanding that whatever this was, it was not over. Not even close. The cafe settled into its mid-morning rhythm, the initial rush fading into a quieter flow of regulars and soft conversations. Lily placed the cup of black coffee on the counter in front of him, sliding it forward with a small, practiced motion. Careful, it is hot, she said, her tone neutral but not distant. He nodded, wrapping his fingers around the cup, but not lifting it right away, his attention still on her rather than the drink. You do this every morning? He asked, glancing briefly around the space as if taking in more than just the surface. Lily wiped her hands on a clean towel, leaning lightly against the counter for a second before answering. Most mornings, she said. This place opens at 5:30. Someone has to be here before that. He considered that, his gaze shifting back to her. And then the restaurant at night, he added. It was not a question. Lily's eyes flickered slightly, a small reaction she could not completely hide. You have been asking around, she said, not accusing, just stating the obvious. He did not deny it. I prefer to understand what I am looking at, he replied calmly. She let out a quiet breath, not quite annoyed, but not entirely comfortable either. And what exactly are you looking at? She asked. There was a pause, just long enough to feel intentional. Someone who is working twice as hard as most people I know, he said, and still being underestimated. Lily held his gaze for a moment, then looked away, reaching for another cup as if the conversation had already gone further than she intended. That is not exactly rare, she said. It just depends on where you are standing. He took a sip of his coffee then, finally, his expression thoughtful. It is rarer than you think, he said quietly. The bell above the door chimed again, pulling Lily's attention back to the counter as two more customers stepped in. She moved instinctively, taking their orders, her voice shifting back into its professional rhythm. But something lingered beneath it now, something more aware. When she returned to him, He had not moved, his cup still half full, his presence steady in a way that did not demand attention but naturally held it. "You are not from around here," she said, more as an observation than a question. He gave a slight shake of his head. "No," he answered, "but I spend enough time in places like this to recognize patterns." "Patterns," she repeated, a faint hint of skepticism in her voice. "People," he clarified. "How they act. What they overlook." She crossed her arms loosely, studying him again, this time more openly. "And what do people like me usually get overlooked for?" she asked. He did not hesitate this time. "Potential," he said. The word landed softly, but it stayed. Lily looked at him for a second longer than necessary, then let out a small, almost disbelieving breath. "Potential does not pay rent," she said. "No," he agreed. "But ignoring it has a cost too." She did not respond right away. Instead, she reached into her apron pocket, pulling out a pen and a small order pad, though she did not need it at that moment. It was something to hold on to, something familiar. "You talk like someone who is used to investing in things," she said. "People," he corrected gently. "Sometimes." Lily tilted her head slightly, something sharper returning to her expression. "And what makes you think I am worth that kind of attention?" she asked. It was not defensive. It was direct. He met her question without hesitation, his voice steady. "Because you already invested in yourself," he said. "Most people do not even start." The words caught her off guard, not because they were dramatic, but because they were precise. For a moment, she did not have a response. And that, more than anything, unsettled her in a way she had not expected. The cafe continued around them, orders called out, cups filled, chairs shifting, but between them, the space felt quieter, more focused. As if something had already begun to shift, even if neither of them had fully named it yet. By late afternoon, the cafe had thinned out, the steady stream of customers replaced by a slower, quieter pace that left more space for thoughts to linger. Lily wiped down the last table near the window, her reflection faintly visible in the glass as the sunlight shifted toward evening. She had not expected him to stay as long as he did, but he had remained through 2 refills, not rushing, not distracting her from her work, just present in a way that felt deliberate. When she returned to the counter, he was already standing, placing a few bills neatly beside his empty cup. "You are leaving," she said, more certain than questioning. He nodded once. "For now," he replied, echoing her words from the night before, and something about that made her pause. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a simple card, not flashy, not designed to impress at first glance, and placed it on the counter between them. "If you ever decide that for now should change," he said calmly, "call me." Lily glanced down at the card but did not pick it up immediately. She had seen gestures like this before, offers that sounded generous but came with expectations she could not afford to misunderstand. "You do not even know me," she said quietly. He met her gaze, steady as ever. "I know enough," he answered. "And the rest is something I am willing to learn." The words were not persuasive in the usual sense. They were not pushing, not promising something unrealistic. They were simple, almost restrained, and that made them harder to dismiss. Lily finally reached for the card, turning it over in her fingers. The name printed on it was clean, minimal, but the moment she read it, something shifted. Alexander Reed. The name settled in her mind, familiar in a way she could not immediately place, like something she had heard before but never connected to a face. She looked back up at him, her expression no longer just cautious, but searching. "Reed," she repeated softly. "As in Reed Industries?" He did not answer with words this time. He simply held her gaze, and that was enough. The realization did not hit all at once. It unfolded slowly, piece by piece, connecting details she had not thought to question. The way he observed instead of reacted. The way he spoke about people, about choices, about potential. The quiet confidence that never needed to prove itself. Lily let out a small breath, almost imperceptible, but it carried more weight than anything she had said so far. "So you have been," she started, then stopped, not finishing the thought. "Watching, evaluating, testing." She was not sure which word fit best. "Paying attention," he said, finishing it for her, his tone unchanged. She nodded slightly, absorbing that, her fingers tightening just a little around the card. "And what happens if I call?" she asked. There was no challenge in it, just a need to understand the terms of something she had not asked for but now stood in front of her anyway. "Then we start with a conversation," he said. "A real one." The simplicity of the answer caught her off guard again. No grand promises. No pressure. Just an opening. Lily looked down at the card one more time, then slipped it into her apron pocket beside the worn paperback, the two resting side by side like two different versions of possibility. When she looked back up, he had already taken a step toward the door. "Alexander," she said, stopping him just before he reached it. He turned, waiting. "I do not need someone to fix my life," she said, her voice steady, clear. "I know," he replied. "That is not why I am here." There was a brief silence, but this one felt different from all the others. It was not uncertain. It was deciding. Lily gave a small nod, not agreeing, not rejecting, just acknowledging what stood between them now. And as he stepped out into the fading light, the bell above the door chiming softly behind him, she realized something had already changed. Not in her circumstances. Not yet. But in the way the future suddenly felt, less closed than it had that morning. The card stayed in her pocket all evening, pressed lightly against the worn edges of her book as Lily moved through her second shift, the restaurant once again glowing with soft light and quiet expectations. Nothing about the room had changed, not the polished tables, not the careful voices, not even the subtle judgment woven into the air, but something inside her had shifted in a way she could not ignore. She moved differently now, not faster, not louder, but with a kind of certainty that had not been there before. When she approached tables, she did not anticipate doubt. When she spoke, she did not measure herself against anyone else in the room. She simply was. And for the first time, that felt enough. The night carried on until the moment she knew was coming finally returned. Charlotte Reed walked in again, her presence as precise and controlled as ever, her eyes scanning the room with quiet authority before landing, almost inevitably, on Lily. There was a pause, brief but noticeable, as if something from the previous night still lingered beneath the surface. Lily stepped forward before being called, her posture straight, her expression calm. "Good evening," she said, her voice steady, unshaken. Charlotte tilted her head slightly, studying her in a way that was less dismissive than before, but no less sharp. "Back again," she said lightly. "I see they still have not replaced you." The words were softer this time, less direct, but the intention remained. Lily did not react the way she had been expected to. She did not shrink, did not rush, did not defend. Instead, she placed the menu down with quiet precision and met Charlotte's gaze fully. "I am exactly where I need to be," she replied. No edge, no hesitation, just truth. Something in Charlotte's expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough to break the rhythm she had relied on. For a moment, she did not respond. Around them, the room continued its quiet movement, but the space between them felt still, as if waiting to see who would define it. Lily did not wait. "Would you like to hear the specials?" she asked, her tone returning to its professional calm, but carrying something stronger beneath it. Charlotte glanced down at the menu, then back up again, her usual certainty no longer quite as effortless. "No," she said after a moment. "I think I understand what is being offered." It was not an apology. It was not a concession, but it was different, and that difference was enough. As Lily stepped away, she felt the weight in her pocket again, the card and the book resting side by side, no longer separate things, but part of the same choice she now held. Later that night, when the last table had cleared and the lights dimmed slightly, she stepped outside once more, the cool air meeting her with a quiet kind of clarity. She reached into her pocket, pulling out the card, turning it over in her fingers as she had done before, but this time, the hesitation felt different. Not fear, not doubt, just a decision waiting to be made. She looked down the empty street, then back at the card, her reflection faintly visible in its surface. "For now," she murmured softly, echoing the words that had followed her since the night before. Then, without overthinking it, she pulled out her phone and dialed the number. The line rang once, then twice, before connecting. Alexander Reed. His voice came through, calm and familiar. Lily took a small breath, her gaze steady, her voice clear. "This is Lily," she said. "I think I am ready for that conversation." There was a brief pause on the other end, not hesitation, but something closer to quiet certainty. "So am I," he replied. And as the call continued, the city stretched out around her, unchanged and yet somehow different, as if the path ahead had not been given to her, but chosen, one step, one decision at a time, by someone who had finally realized she had never been invisible at all.